grandpa stole his first buggy in 1892. I met your grandma pig slopping in 46.
Oh, every Christmas we'd visit my Uncle Fred in prison.
And welcome, America, to America's Family History Show, Extreme Genes and ExtremeGenes.com. It is Fisher here. I am your radio root sleuth on the program where we shake your family tree and watch the nuts fall out. Big show today. We kind of touched on this last week about how the New York Municipal Archives, through their DORIS website, which is the Department of Records and Internet Services, released over 9 million images of vital records, birth, marriage, and death records. And I've been going crazy with it all week. And so I figured, okay, let's get on the line with the president of the New York Genealogical and Biographical Society, Josh Taylor, to talk about it and see how he's feeling about it in 2 segments coming up in just a little bit. Hey, if you haven't signed up for our weekly Genie newsletter yet, you get all kinds of news about what's happening in our space, plus past and present shows and links to stories you'll appreciate as a genealogist. And one guy I've always appreciated as a genealogist is the chief genealogist of the New England Historic Genealogical Society and AmericanAncestors.org. Hello, David Allen Lambert.
Hey, Fish, I can tell you that I am delighted to talk to you, and I am very anxious about the upcoming release of the 1950 U.S. Census this week.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's coming out on Friday, and I know there are going to be a lot of people who aren't going to wait for that thing to be entirely indexed. They're going to be looking all over the place on those original images that are going to be released by the National Archives, at midnight on the 1st?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's going to be
That's
fun.
going to break the internet,
yeah.
I'm sure. Well, I have a question for you.
Sure.
Have you ever mislaid something or, for a long length of time, a year or two, and found it again?
Not really. I don't know
Like
why
your
that
wallet?
is. No, I keep the wallet close,
Well, that's always a good thing. Well, a story that I want to share is with Dennis Gray, Jr., who was a pilot in the U.S. Navy fighting in the Pacific in World War II. His plane had gone down at the Battle of Okinawa, and his body was never recovered. But recently, his wallet has been found.
Wow.
And this is amazing because it's, of course, the first sign of him for the family in 77 years.
That is incredible. And from what I understand, that he's got photos in there, and I guess it was left behind in the United States. It has an Air Force insignia on the leather and the outside of the wallet. What a treasure for that family. And it was returned to them.
Well, better late than never, but what a wonderful gift for them to have to hold on to.
Yeah.
And another generation that would never known about him can hold his wallet. Great thing. Another World War II story is about the ladies of the all-black 6,888th, known as the 6888 Battalion in World War II. They are now getting a Congressional Gold Medal, just like the Ghost Squadron that we talked about before. They have only a handful of survivors of the unit of 850 ladies, and they were responsible for the mail for the War Department, and they were actually sent over to England to help with the backlog.
This was like in 1945, towards the end of the war, but making sure everybody got their mail. And so they're being recognized right now as well. That's great. World War II, it's the event that keeps on giving, isn't it?
It really is. But I'm going to take the Wayback Machine a little further back to Evacuation Day in 1776, when the British left Boston. Now, we also celebrate St. Patrick's Day, but recent news after St. Patrick's Day is that the battle monument at Dorchester Heights, where Washington and the troops were, is now being restored. A multi-million-dollar renovation of this monument that was dated back to 1902 will now have a new facelift, which is great.
That's quite a day. And, I don't think most of the country is aware of Evacuation Day, but I know in Boston that's a big deal.
It really is. And so we celebrate 2 holidays, St. Patrick's Day and Evacuation Day. And most people think Evacuation Day just means get out of work early to go to the bars, but it really isn't the case at all. I like to think that they think of it as a Revolutionary War history item, but Who knows? Speaking of Revolutionary War history, the National Society of Sons of the American Revolution's headquarters are in Louisville, Kentucky, and I'm very excited that their new research library director is our friend Sherry Daniels, who is going to be working there starting in the month of April.
Oh,
so
wow.
Congratulations.
Yeah, absolutely. That's going to be a great job for her. And we ought to talk about this Civil War story that just came out here recently.
From the Washington Post. Letters from former enslaved individuals back to their enslaver. And I want to read this one. It's very, very touching. It's from Jordan Anderson, a former enslaved individual from Tennessee. He had actually got a letter from his enslaver who wanted to offer him a job. So Jordan writes back to him, giving some conditions. Let me read part of the letter. As to my freedom, which you say I can have, there is nothing to be gained on that score, as I got my free papers in 1864 from the Provost Marshal General of the Department of Nashville. Mandy says she would be afraid to go back without some proof that you are disposed to treat us justly and kindly, and we have concluded to test your sincerity by asking you to send our wages for the time we served you. This will make us forget and forgive old scores and rely on your justice and friendship in the future. I served you faithfully for 32 years and Mandy 20 years at $25 a month for me and $2 a week for Mandy. Our earnings would amount to $11,680. Add this to the interest for the time our wages would have been kept back and deduct what you paid for our clothing and our 3 doctor visits for me and pulling a tooth for Mandy, and the balance will show what we in justice are entitled to. Please send the money by Adams Express in care of V. Winters, Esquire, Dayton, Ohio. If you fail to pay us for faithful labors in the past, we can have little faith in your promises in the future.
And that's just a part of it. I know.
It's
that's just
great.
What an awesome letter. And he dictated it to this guy who was supporting him in it. And they actually published that in a newspaper in 1865 before the Post did their thing. So there you go. That's our family histoire news for this week. Coming up next, Josh Taylor, president of the New York Genealogical and Biographical Society, talking about the incredible release of over 9 million vital records free online for you. Coming up next in 3 minutes on Extreme Genes.
Unknown parentage, lineage society membership, building your family tree, leaving a legacy. Regardless of your reasons for hiring a professional researcher, Legacy Tree Genealogists can help you discover your family's past. Their genealogists are highly rated in their field with specialties in DNA analysis, historical context, and forensic genealogy. For nearly 20 years, Legacy Tree Genealogists have created thousands of professionally bound and digital reports for families like yours around the world. So whether you've hit a brick wall in your research or are just getting started, Legacy Tree Genealogists can help you tell your story and preserve it for generations to come. To receive a free estimate for professional research, visit legacytree.com or call 1-800-818-1476. That's 1-800-818-1476. We'd be happy to talk to you. Legacy Tree Genealogists.
Hey Genies, as we've dug into our family history explorations over the past year, our community at Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies has taken off. This is where you can meet like-minded genealogists who can help you break through those brick walls and find a whole city behind it, occupied by ancestors whose names you don't even know yet. This is where you can learn from your fellow genies and ask questions, because many in our community have already been into some of the records you're looking for. Genealogy and Breakthrough Strategies is free. What a great place for brainstorming and getting to know other people who totally get your passion for family history research. If you're looking to take the next step in sharpening your skills, here's a great chance to learn from others and give back in areas you've already become expert in. So join us. That page again is Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies. It's a long name, but we cover a lot of territory. Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies. Hey, Genies, Ancestry now has an exclusive partnership with PhotoMine, the leader in photo scanning and archiving. What does this mean to you? Well, imagine inheriting an old photo album and you want to digitize all the images. Up until now, you'd have to remove the pictures, place them in a scanner, crop them, and perhaps use Photoshop to improve them. Now, by using these amazing PhotoMine tools from Ancestry, you can use your phone to take a picture of an entire page from your album. The tools will automatically separate and crop each picture, improve focus, and restore color or colorize your images. Then you can assign which picture goes to which person on your tree. If you've been waiting years to get around to the tedious project of scanning your old albums, it's been worth the wait. No more pulling your photo albums apart and trying to reinsert the pictures back in proper order. No more tearing of your old photos while removing them from those so-called magnetic albums of the 1970s. Sign in to Ancestry through their mobile app to try it out. Welcome back to America's Family History Show, Extreme Genes and ExtremeGenes.com. Fisher here, your radio root sleuth. Still a little bit in stun mode after the announcement just over a week ago from DORIS, the Department of Records and Internet Services in New York City, releasing digitized images of over 9 million vital records of New York, going up to 1949. And this is kind of an unusual thing because there's been a lot of challenges with getting the municipal archives in New York to release their records publicly and not have to have people go and physically visit in New York. And that's why I thought it was a good time to get on the line with my friend D. Joshua Taylor. He is the president of the New York Genealogical and Biographical Society, one of my favorite places because I have a lot of New York families in my background. Josh, it's great to have you back on Extreme Genes.
Thanks for having me. It's always fun to be here.
Did you have a heads up on this thing?
We had about a 24-hour notice, and let me tell you, I'm still picking myself up off of the floor.
Yes.
After seeing it and knowing this was coming to everybody in just a few hours.
Yeah, it was nuts, and I got on it as soon as I got up to check it out and found a whole bunch of things. Now, for people who are New York researchers or had people go through New York, or obviously birth, death, and marriage is really what we're keying on here, you're going to have an opportunity here to actually see digitized photos of the original record. This is not like the photocopy off of the microfilm that got digitized. These are beautiful images of these documents.
Right, they're beautiful. They are full-color, downloadable PDFs that you can take and look at and use. I mean, they're gorgeous images.
Yeah, if you're going to create, say, a commercial book or something and you want to put some of these in there, I would imagine there's got to be some licensing involved, right?
There is, and there is information about licensing images at the bottom of the screen there on the DORIS website. But yeah, for genealogists and family historians looking to connect their New York roots, this is a gold mine.
Yeah, this is a huge thing. I see it goes back to 1855, and I know that most certificates did not go back that far. So these are very hard to search when they go back that early. Any thoughts on that, Josh?
You know, the thing to remember is the Department of Records and Information Services holds a number of early vital records, but coverage is not consistent.
Right.
So while they might date back to 1855 and 1857, there are gaps in coverage there. Mm-hmm. And some of those records have been indexed more accurately than others, and some of them are more complete than others. But the early ones are on there now, early by sort of the 1850s, 1860s are available now.
That's amazing. One of the things that was mentioned on the website is that before 1909, about 25% of all births were not recorded. And certainly that's been the case in my family. Are you seeing a lot of that?
That's absolutely correct. There was nothing. I will say that the slight letdown from the announcement was realizing that no, the birth was actually not recorded mm-hmm. for some of the folks that we were looking for.
Yeah, what was the reason for that? Did you have any insight on that?
You know, I think a lot of it has to do with compliance and just the sheer nature of wanting to record a vital record, perhaps some superstition around doing that. You know, there were language barriers, there were transportation issues. Mm-hmm. So I always say it's conceivable that a birth might not be recorded for no ill intention at all. It just didn't happen.
You know, marriages, I notice a lot of those aren't there also. So I think a lot of people moved in together, and we didn't hear about it back then. We always kind of assumed that everything was just prim and proper back in the 19th century. And the records of New York tell you, really, that wasn't quite the story.
Right, that's absolutely visible, and even more visible now with this release.
Yeah, absolutely. So the question now, Josh, is what comes next? DORIS, the Department of Records and Internet Services, is basically the website of the Municipal Archives, correct?
Correct. And they have launched this site called Historical Vital Records.
Right.
And it represents projects they've been working on, as they say, from 2013. They've been working to digitize images, and certainly some factors push that process along. Mm-hmm. And they've released 70% of the vital records online with this launch. So there's still plenty to come, and the website has great charts that show what records have been released, what records are still being digitized. But 70% is still a significant portion of records to look through.
Yeah, it's 9.3 million are on there now. The question is finding them sometimes because of the issues with the search engine. We'll talk about that in a minute. But that also means there's another 4 million still to come. So this means that if you go on there, you can't find what you're looking for. Come back later. Come back in a month. Come back in 6 months or a year. You may very well find it then.
Yeah, we don't know the release schedule. I'm not sure whether they digitize the rest of that 30% or they halfway through, a quarter way through. We're not sure how frequently it's going to be updated. But we know they're ready and waiting and at least identified per some of the finding aids that are on the site.
Sure. So the question is then, does this represent a fundamental shift in the thinking of the municipal archives as far as releasing records to the public and making them available online?
You know, I think so, and I sure hope so. I mean, I cannot commend the archives enough for releasing this free, with no paywall, with no registration wall. This is the heart of what public records are, and so giving us access to these materials is phenomenal, and I'm hopeful that it's the first of many other things that will come our way.
Well, and for people who aren't familiar with it, who have New York connections, let's talk a little about what some of those other records are that are in the municipal archives that are not available online that we could be seeing potentially, possibly down the line.
You know, there's a lot of materials held by the municipal archives. If you consider the city archive for New York, there's a myriad of different things out there. You know, there's police records, there's some different types of census schedules, there's bodies in transit materials, there's tax lists, there's all sorts of different types of materials, discharge records that are sitting in the municipal archives.
Well, and when you consider how everything has been locked down for the last 2 years and nobody could get anywhere, especially the National Archives right now, to have this suddenly available out of the blue, it's like, okay, that time was obviously well spent during the pandemic and obviously before that as well. But to have it come out at this point in time, it's just like a big breath of fresh air, isn't it?
You know, it really is. I mean, one of the things that we in New York have been really struggling with over the past 2 years is access to these records because we can find the indexes. We know there's a certificate number to look at, but if the archives isn't open, if we can't get an appointment, we sit and wait. And now that changes. Yeah,
very much so. Can you get in now? What is the status of the municipal archives?
So you can go in and research, usually by appointment. You just let them know. And I know several people who've been down to research and to get reacquainted with the materials at Muni.
You know, the thing about the municipal archives is I'm always amazed when I start going through. One of your people, I can't remember his name, sorry about that, wrote a book about all the things that are available there. And the list is pretty endless of things you might not even imagine exist.
Right. That was Aaron Goodwin, who, so the NYGNB worked with the municipal archives to put together this guide, and it sits on my shelf all the time. And I'm usually looking at it and going, oh, I didn't realize they had that record set or that record set.
Yeah, well, you can't keep them all in your head. And I've talked about this many times before. I had a New York veteran fireman who was part of the volunteer force back in the 1850s and 1860s. And they actually dug them out and found the fireman records there at the municipal archive several years ago and went in. And half the people down there, though, don't even know what they have. And so they dug these things out, and we found some marvelous records about this great-grandfather and the units that he served in. It listed his home address, what his occupation was, what his age was, who he served with. Sometimes they were representatives for their various hose companies or engine companies. And you can even look up records of Boss Tweed on there when he was serving as a volunteer fireman, who, for people who don't know, was the most corrupt politician probably in the history of the world.
Yeah, the records there are incredible. I know when we were working through the process, I came to the G&B just as they were finishing the publication, and I was shocked and delighted to find the number of collections that Aaron, when he worked through the process, discovered or rediscovered. that the archives team there themselves, that's right, that's there. So it's a huge archival repository, and I'm looking forward to many, many other resources coming out, court records, some of the records of almshouses. There's all sorts of things there.
It just keeps going and going. And you're right. This is the thing. I remember talking to somebody once early in my journey with all this stuff about why is it so hard to find things. They said, well, part of it is because New York has generated so many records. Some are with the New York Historical Society. Some are with the New York Public Library. Some are with the Municipal Archives. Some are over here. Some are over there. And they themselves don't even know what they have because the number of records are so immense. And some people have parts of a collection and another organization has another part of that collection. It's a really, really difficult thing to do.
It really is. And one of the complicating factors in New York research is, New York State has its own vital record system and its own archive system, and then New York City is completely separate. And so what you would go to in a state archive, normally outside of New York, it's just very different when you're doing New York City research.
Absolutely. And then you got different problems like New York State doesn't have, for instance, an 1890 census, but New York City does because they didn't like the results, so they sent the police out to do another one. And what a gift for those of us who have New York ancestors back there. And then, of course, upstate, you had the fire in Albany, so that dealt a huge blow, especially to early research. But there's just so much between the two of them. I'm hoping through the course of time, internet technology will bring a lot of this together. And I think it's happening.
I absolutely agree. I think one of the huge benefits of this release is that it breaks down that first step for so many people researching New York City, that birth, marriage, or death record.
Yep.
I can't tell you how many times that process has taken days, months, weeks, years for people.
And the money and the travel and all the things that I did in the early years of the 80s and 90s to go through that stuff. I'm talking to Josh Taylor. He's the president of the New York Genealogical and Biographical Society. Josh, can you stick around and we'll talk a little more about what else is going on in New York these days, because your society is right in the thick of it.
Absolutely.
All right, we'll get to it in 5 minutes on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show. All right, back at it on Extreme Genes. Fisher here with Joshua Taylor. He's the president of the New York Genealogical and Biographical Society in New York City. And Josh, during the break, we just discovered we're related. We share Everardus Bogardus, the second minister among the Dutch at New Amsterdam, and his wife, the famous Anneke Jans. And that's a whole story in itself. We're not going to go into that, Josh, but nonetheless, you guys at NYGNBS have really come along with some great projects during the pandemic that people need to know about.
Well, thank you. I love sharing everything I can about the things that we went up to. During the pandemic, we remodeled our headquarters in New York City. We represent the entire state. Our offices are essentially an administrative location. And we put in a new education center with equipment that enables us to live stream and broadcast programming that's happening here. And the other really exciting development was the addition of a digitization center, which enables us to capture and scan more records than ever before.
Really?
So we are actively working with volunteers and others almost every day now to preserve New York records.
So how many pages can you scan in the course of a business day?
So it depends on the record set. It's a good question.
Sure,
but we are anywhere from 300 to 500 to 800 a day of pages that we can capture, just depending on the material.
Yeah, so up to 4,000 in a 5-day work week.
That's right.
Yeah, you do that over the course of a year, a couple 100,000 pages of New York, and I would imagine you're cherry picking the very best records. That's a big deal.
We are. The role of the NYGNB in how we preserve records is we specifically look for records that are at risk due to preservation reasons, or that are not going to be digitized by some of the other players in the field, right? A record set that is too small for an ancestry or a family search to set up a whole camera operation, but are important for us to preserve. And so we get things like religious records and cemeteries and different copybooks that might be created from a county or a town. All sorts of interesting things come through our doors.
Do you work with some of the other players in New York, like the archives or the New York Public Library? Will they loan you things to digitize?
From time to time, yes. We're trying to work as closely as possible with other libraries, institutions across the state. There's town historians in New York that have great resources there, and we try and tap into those and make sure, one, that we know about the records that they have,
right,
and also do what we can to digitize them and make them available.
So how much is the catalog of records of the city and state of New York growing still, where, you're finally becoming aware of something in, say, Ulster County, New York, that you had no idea existed, nobody had it on any list before, and suddenly you've added it? What's out there? What are you finding?
I can honestly say that it grows every day.
Really?
We've been working on a project, thanks to some funding from the Pomeroy Foundation, to work one-on-one with local record holders in upstate New York. And what we're finding is things like store account books, copies of court records, some of these records that went into private hands, cemetery association materials that have never been inventoried or identified, that the one person in the town knows where they are. And so our goal is to find that one person in town and see what we can do about those records. But I can honestly say it grows every day. The catalog of records is far from complete.
You said a word in there that intrigued me a little bit, and that is private hands. I've always maintained, and I say this often to people, even on this show, that I think the largest family archive for any individual's family is in the attics of their distant cousins. And with that same idea in mind with you, how do you find private individuals and their private collections? How does that work?
A lot of it is through connecting with a town historian or a local historical genealogical society there that might already know about the collection, but really hasn't had a platform to share or amplify that message for others. Mm-hmm. And, sometimes it's going to a particular religious denomination and saying, what do you have? And they say, 50 years ago, this person kept the records, and so they were with their family. And it takes some patience and some time, but it's possible. But I will say it's time consuming.
Yeah, I would think so. But, it's not like anybody's missing it because they don't know it exists yet until you've got it up there,
Exactly.
So what are some of the things that you've discovered using this technique?
Some of the things, and we're just in sort of a pilot phase of this particular project, one of the things that we've discovered the most are some account books that are incredibly valuable for particular communities. Yeah. The local blacksmith, the local doctor, the local justice of the peace. And those are materials that document life, right? They document births, marriage, and deaths, but they also document everyday interactions. And those have been particularly fun to find and to look through and see what we can do to make those available.
Well, and I'll add to that, having found some of those old store records from the late 1700s for several of my ancestors. First of all, it is fascinating. Daily life, just like you say. But it also adds to their timeline of when were they still there? When did they move, if they're in between census records, for instance? Things like that can be answered. And often, sometimes you can even find a name in there that you didn't have in any other record.
Right. That's one of the important points when you look at New York as a state that's full of migration. Your family might have lived in a particular town in between census years, and you would never know it unless you pick them up in another record like a store account or something they do at a local level.
And the doctor's records, too, those are really interesting. Kind of gives you an idea of what they had to battle, things that oftentimes we don't even think about these days.
Well, absolutely. And sometimes, there are substitutes for a vital record. It might not be as detailed as a death certificate, but a doctor who's with someone or part of someone's either birth or when they're passing away or when they're ill, it creates a myriad of different records. And what we're finding is that these collections stretch from 1700s up until the 1900s, even into the beginning of the 21st century.
Really?
And it's a big job because there's so much out there. And right now we're basically just asking questions and getting answers. But, these types of records have existed in New York and other places, of course, for years and years. We just don't always use them.
Right. I've got to imagine there are similar organizations to yours throughout the country. People listen to this show and hear things like this, and the light might go on. What advice would you give to them?
You have to be patient, but also really consider the entire lifetime of your ancestor and just try and think of all the different elements and things that might exist, and it never hurts to ask. I mean, we're finding town historians in New York, they know so much about the local community, and they should be a first stop for so many people.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of times we think we know so much, and yet you go talk to somebody like that, and they'll say, well, have you tried this record set? And it's like, what record set is that? Where did that come from?
Yep.
I had no idea. What else is going on with Upstate? Do you have a relationship with the state archives and what's happening there?
So for the past couple of years, we've actually been working on a guide of family history materials at the New York State Archives. And Jane Wilcox, who's a member of our Family History Advisory Committee and a well-known New York researcher, is the lead author on that project. And we are getting closer and closer to release of that publication. But similar to our guide to the New York City Municipal Archives, this is a guide to the New York State Archives.
Yeah.
And, we think about military records, court records, land records, anything that the state is involved in. It is a treasure trove of New York material. And we've found things in the process of that project that no one knew existed.
Same thing.
And I have the wonderful fortune of reading the drafts of the chapters, and I have to admit, I read a draft and I start making a list when I have time and going, oh, wow, this is great for this project.
Absolutely.
So I'm really excited to get that out and in print for everybody to start using.
He's Joshua Taylor. He's the president of the New York Genealogical and Biographical Society. And Josh, congrats. Obviously, your world has just changed here in the last week or two. And this is going to be a lot of fun to see what continues to emerge from the municipal archives. And congrats on all that you're accomplishing over at NYGNBS. It's great stuff.
Well, thank you. I love being in New York. I love being part of New York family history, and I can't wait to see what else we can do.
I'm looking forward to it myself. Thanks so much for coming on.
Absolutely.
David Allen Lambert is next as we continue on with Ask Us Anything on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show in 3 minutes. Hey Genies, it's Fisher here, and my shiny new ExtremeGenes.com website has been described as having that new car smell. I love hearing that. Having been with you for over 8 years now, it felt like time to help out listeners and followers who need to know the basics of genealogical research, as well as how to understand your DNA test results, and to be able to put them to work for you, breaking down brick walls, identifying birth parents, locating new cousins who may have photos and information that can't be found anywhere else, and verifying your paper trails. Yes, DNA can do all that, and I can show you how. Check out the all-new ExtremeGenes.com website and download the free Genealogy Strategy Roadmap and the free DNA Starter Guide. Then, if you like what you see, you can take those next steps to sign up for the video courses that you can watch at your leisure. I'll take you through all the basics, step by step. Find out more now at ExtremeGenes.com.
Unknown parentage, lineage society membership, building your family tree, leaving a legacy. Regardless of your reasons for hiring a professional researcher, Legacy Tree Genealogists can help you discover your family's past. Their genealogists are highly rated in their field with specialties in DNA analysis, historical context, and forensic genealogy. For nearly 20 years, Legacy Tree Genealogists have created thousands of professionally bound and digital reports for families like yours around the world. So whether you've hit a brick wall in your research or are just getting started, Legacy Tree Genealogists can help you tell your story and preserve it for generations to come. To receive a free estimate for professional research, visit legacytree.com or call 1-800-818-1476. That's 1-800-818-1476. We'd be happy to talk to you. Legacy Tree Genealogists.
Genies, if you haven't done so yet, you've got to check out Ancestry.com's new storytelling creation center, Ancestry Stories. Their story builder allows you to create a story with 6 different slide types, including a title page, a photo display page, including stock pictures they provide, and documents. And you can write a summary. And with those photos, you can add motion, panning left to right or right to left. For now, these stories can only be created on your iPhone, but Android is still to come and can be saved to your ancestors' pages on your trees. You can then access via phone, and in time, it'll appear on your desktop. You can also share it with family members and friends, whether or not they subscribe to Ancestry.com. For the younger generation that wants stories in a quick and easy-to-consume form, you can't beat this. I've already shared a story with my family, and the reactions are remarkable. Try out these incredible new tools and share your new story creations on social media using hashtag #MyAncestryStory. All right, back on the job for Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show, and ExtremeGenes.com. It is time for Ask Us Anything, and David Allen Lambert is back. And Dave, we got an email from Ralph in Lansing, Michigan, who says, "Hello, Fisher and Dave Meister." I like that, Dave Meister. When I was a boy in the 1950s, my great-grandfather told me that in the 19th century, the family was told they were in line for a large fortune from England. But for some reason, it didn't happen. Is it possible that as a descendant, I could still be in line for such a thing? How would I go about learning more about this? Ralph.
Ooh, yeah, that was the P.T. Barnum, the sucker born every minute. Thing happened to my family.
Yeah.
In Nova Scotia, Canada, my Clarks are related to a family by the name of Sands. And to quote the Sands fortune, somebody came over from New York, went up to Canada and says, "You're all entitled to this fortune." Sands had been a soldier in the Loyalist forces and settled up in Nova Scotia. So they all collected money for the legal fees. Even my great-great-grandfather in the 1880s is mentioned in this newspaper article, looking forward to this fortune. And then the person went away with the legal fees, and they never heard from him again.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you know, just talking to Josh Taylor a few minutes ago, we mentioned that he and I are both descended from Everardus Bogardus and the famous Annika Jans, his wife. What made her famous was that one of her descendants didn't get some of the land that she owned from her first husband that she left behind when she died in the 1600s. And that land, of course, became Manhattan real estate that it just so happened Trinity Church sat on. And so the descendants went after that from the 1700s all the way up to the 1950s. It's the most famous land case, inheritance case like that you'll ever find. In fact, I met another descendant once who he himself remembered as a boy, lawyers coming around to collect money to try to continue this case because it was going to be worth billions. And
now, did you and Josh have this ancestor that actually had participated in this claim?
Actually, mine did, not his, because he came from the first son. But there was that case, and then my wife had the Douglas family from Montgomery County, Indiana, and likewise, they had the same kind of thing going on with that. It's mentioned in his obituary. He was waiting for a large fortune from Scotland, and there was a story in the family that was passed down that somebody actually came to visit and discuss this with the family. They stepped out of the room for a minute, came back, the guy was gone, and took the family Bible with him. Obviously as proof of his descent, you see, to try to claim the fortune or to eliminate them from claiming any part of it so he could get more. So it was a really interesting thing. And then there was another branch in my side of the family from the 19th century, the Townley estate fortune, supposedly from the early 1700s over in England. This wealthy man did not like the idea of his daughter marrying this guy, so he cut her out of the will. Well, they went over to the United States, so the story went. Then he had a change of heart, put her back in the will, but nobody ever knew that. And so now this fortune had been developing over a century and a half. It was time for people to start getting their share of the money. So once again, the lawyers went out and did their thing. So, Ralph, this is a very common story. I promise you there's no fortune waiting for you. Good luck in the future.
So that means I can't write to Norway and ask for them to return the gold they took from my ancestors during the Viking raids.
Yeah, something like that. This is a really common thing, and you've heard of 4 of them just in this segment. It makes for a great story in your family history if you're writing about your ancestors. I think that's the best thing about it. I only learned about the English money in the early 1700s because my great aunt left information about that in a note to us in the late 60s. We'll have another question coming up in 3 minutes on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show. All right, here we go. Final question on Ask Us Anything on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show. Fisher here with David Allen Lambert. And Dave, this one is from Lena in Los Angeles. And she says, guys, I recently found a bunch of my great-grandfather's checks from the 19-teens to the 1940s. Is there any reason concerning family history that I should save these? That's a good question. I mean, I would think it would be fun to have an autograph or two of your ancestors, something they actually signed.
And that would probably be just the start of it, because I'm sure you don't have a lot of things that he signed, but I want you to look at that as a time capsule. He probably doesn't have a diary, probably don't have a lot of letters that he wrote, but each one of these checks represents some episode in his life. I mean, if he's giving money to his church, or he's paying for his coal bill, or maybe he had a wagon repaired in the 19-teens, but by the 1930s, he's having his Ford repaired. Where is he having it repaired? I mean, it's simple as starting like a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
Put in the check dates, put in the amount, put in the services or who it was made out to. And then you might find under that fan approach, family, associates, and neighbors, maybe he's paying a family member for a wedding gift, or maybe it's an associate that he knows from work that let him borrow $5 last month and he's paying it back. Or maybe it's the neighbor that, well, his son threw a baseball through the plate glass window of the store and he's paying for that glass. I mean, each check probably has a story behind it.
Maybe it's a lawyer who's going to go after a large fortune overseas.
Or maybe it's a settlement check that he has to divide up amongst his kids because they want their share. Anyone could be really so fortunate to have these because it's an insight into someone's life. I can only think of my parents. I have some of their canceled checks, and I thought the same thing. What am I going to do with it, Fish?
Yeah.
But then I started looking at them like a check that they wrote to somebody for a wedding gift, and on the back it's endorsed by the couple. So they've got their signature. Now, that check doesn't mean much to me, but the idea that the couple's now been married 50 years and, you know, here's something that they would have got as a wedding gift, and I say, hey, I can give it back to you again. Here's your signature when you guys were kids. There's all sorts of different things that I've looked at. I'm like, oh, I didn't realize that they bought something from this store. When that generation is no longer with you, each fabric of their story is important. And checks, as insignificant as they seem, can actually be part of a story, building that diary.
It is a personal item, isn't it? And it's funny because when we talk about money, people are often very private about what they do with their finances and that type of thing. So this is really kind of an intimate look. And the very fact that they saved all these checks for 30 years tells you how they felt about how they ran their lives, that they wanted to keep a receipt for everything. That tells you a little something about their personality.
It really does. And I mean, if we think of our own generation, what are we leaving for the next 100 years? How many people pay bills online now? Don't have a lot of checks. Sometimes if I do a large check, I do a bank money order or something like that. And do you actually get back your check? Sometimes you get digital images or nothing.
That's about it. So. Yeah, there's no originals anymore. This is why we're losing letters, we're losing checks, we're losing all kinds of personal things that we don't think much about now. And I'm hoping that at some point there will be some archive, say, of Facebook posts and Twitter posts and things like that. So we'll see how that works out. But thank you for the question, Lena. I hope that helps. And maybe you can have some fun kind of making a little timeline about what they're buying and what their interests were. Even what they buy tells you a little something about your folks. So thanks, Dave, so much. Of course, we'll talk to you again next week after the 1950 census comes out.
And I don't have any sleep for the days after that because I'm trying to track down every aunt, uncle, and cousin that I have that was alive then. Until then...
Exactly. All right, David, take care. And thanks for joining us this week. Thanks once again to Josh Taylor, president of the New York Genealogical and Biographical Society, for coming on. If you missed any of the show, of course, catch it on Apple Media, iTunes, iHeartRadio, ExtremeGenes.com, Spotify, TuneIn Radio. We're all over the place. Talk to you next week. And remember, as far as everyone knows, we're a nice, normal family.